4 weeks ago, the loss rate was acceptable. Calculated risk, expected attrition in a high-threat environment. Then the numbers changed. 8 aircraft down in 28 days, 5 pilots killed, 3 captured and paraded on Iranian state television. And this morning, the Pentagon issued a directive that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. U.S. fighter pilots are no longer authorized to enter Iranian airspace. The losses began on a night strike mission. 2 F-18 Super Hornets, flying from a carrier in the Gulf of Oman, were tasked with destroying a suspected missile production facility near Qom. The target was deep inside Iranian territory, approximately 400 kilometers from the border. The flight plan routed the aircraft through what intelligence assessed as a gap in Iran's air defense coverage. Electronic warfare support would jam known radar sites. The strike would be fast, precise, and executed before Iranian defenses could react. Both aircraft were detected 180 kilometers from the target. An S-300 missile battery, positioned on high ground overlooking the approach corridor, tracked the jets from the moment they crossed into Iranian airspace. The battery did not immediately engage. It waited, allowing the aircraft to penetrate deeper, reducing their escape options. When the decision to fire was made, 4 missiles launched simultaneously. The pilots received threat warnings, deployed countermeasures, and attempted evasive maneuvers. 1 aircraft evaded the initial salvo. The other did not. The missile detonated close enough to shred the airframe with fragmentation. The pilot did not eject. The aircraft impacted the ground at high speed. The surviving F-18 aborted the mission and egressed at maximum speed, pursued by additional missiles that exhausted their fuel before reaching intercept range. The pilot returned to the carrier shaken but alive. The loss of his wingman was classified as a combat casualty, the first of what would become an unsustainable trend. 3 days later, an F-16 conducting reconnaissance near the Iran-Iraq border was engaged by a Khordad-15 medium-range surface-to-air missile system. The pilot ejected successfully but landed in Iranian territory. He was captured within hours and appeared on Iranian television that evening, seated in a chair, visibly injured, making statements that may or may not have been coerced. The propaganda value was immediate and significant. Over the following weeks, the losses accumulated. An F-15E Strike Eagle shot down during a deep penetration mission. Another F-18 lost to a coordinated engagement by multiple air defense systems operating in a networked configuration. 2 more F-16s, 1 destroyed and 1 damaged severely enough that it crashed on return to base. Each incident followed a similar pattern. U.S. aircraft entering Iranian airspace, being detected by integrated radar networks and engaged by surface-to-air missiles before they could reach their targets or complete their reconnaissance. The common factor was integration. Iran's air defense network is not a collection of independent systems operating in isolation. It is a coordinated architecture where detection by 1 radar can cue launches from multiple batteries. A long-range S-300 system might detect an inbound aircraft at 300 kilometers. That data is transmitted via fiber-optic cable to a command center which assigns the target to a closer Khordad-15 battery positioned along the aircraft's flight path. The Khordad system does not need to activate its own radar, which would alert the pilot and invite anti-radiation missile attack. It receives targeting data from the network, launches missiles while remaining electronically silent, and guides them using data link from distant radars. This network architecture defeats traditional suppression of enemy air defense tactics. ceded missions rely on detecting radar emissions, identifying their location, and destroying the emitter with anti-radiation missiles like the AGM-88 HARM. But if the radars operate intermittently, transmitting only long enough to update tracking data before shutting down, and if the missile launchers fire without emitting, the ceded mission has no targets. Pilots are left flying through an environment where threats can engage them without revealing their positions. Electronic warfare aircraft, primarily EA-18G Growlers, are tasked with jamming enemy radars to create corridors through which strike aircraft can penetrate. But Iran employs multi-frequency radar systems that can shift between bands faster than jamming equipment can adapt. A radar transmitting an X-band can be jammed, at which point it switches to S-band or VHF. The jammer must retune, during which the radar continues tracking. The cat-and-mouse dynamic favors the defender, who operates from fixed positions with unlimited electrical power, against an airborne jammer with limited fuel and processing capacity. The human cost extends beyond the immediate casualties. Each pilot lost represents 10 years of training and approximately $10 million in investment. Fighter pilots are not replaceable assets. The training pipeline from initial flight school through combat certification takes years. Losses at this rate, sustained over months, would deplete the force faster than replacements could be trained. And beyond the numbers, there is the psychological impact. Pilots who watch their wingmen die, who see colleagues captured and broadcast on enemy television, carry trauma that affects performance even if they continue flying. After the 8th loss, senior commanders faced a decision. Continuing operations over Iranian airspace at current tempo would result in additional casualties that the force could not sustain. The tactical objectives being achieved did not justify the human and material cost. Targets were being struck, but not decisively. Reconnaissance was being gathered, but at prohibitive expense. The operational returns were diminishing while the losses remained constant. The directive was drafted, reviewed and issued with minimal public announcement. U.S. fighter aircraft are no longer authorized to cross into Iranian airspace except under extraordinary circumstances and with explicit approval from Theater Command. All strike missions will be conducted using standoff weapons launched from outside Iranian borders. Close air support for ground forces, should ground operations be required, will be limited to areas outside the integrated air defense umbrella. Reconnaissance will rely primarily on satellite imagery and unmanned systems. The immediate effect was a reduction in risk to pilots. No border crossings meant no exposure to Iran's integrated air defenses. But it also meant a significant reduction in operational capability. Standoff weapons like cruise missiles have limited inventory and high cost. They cannot provide the flexibility and responsiveness of manned aircraft operating inside contested airspace. Targets that require direct visual confirmation or immediate strike authority cannot be engaged if aircraft are prohibited from approaching them. Unmanned systems offer an alternative, but they come with their own limitations. MQ-9 Reaper drones have been employed extensively, but 11 have been shot down in the same 4-week period. Each loss costs approximately $30 million, and while the financial impact is significant, the more critical issue is that drones cannot perform all the missions that manned aircraft can. They lack the speed, altitude, and survivability to operate effectively in highly contested environments. They are useful for surveillance in permissive airspace but cannot substitute for fighter bombers conducting deep strikes. The strategic implication is that Iran has successfully established air superiority over its own territory. Not by deploying a larger air force or more advanced fighters, but by building an integrated air defense network that imposes unacceptable costs on any force attempting to operate overhead. The network does not need to shoot down every aircraft, it only needs to shoot down enough to make continued operations unsustainable. The prisoners remain in Iranian custody. The 3 captured pilots have been used for propaganda purposes, appearing in staged interviews where they describe their missions and express regret. The content is clearly scripted, but the images are real. The American public is watching its military personnel held captive, and political pressure is mounting for their release. Negotiations are ongoing but have yielded no results. Iran views the prisoners as strategic assets, leverage to be used in broader discussions about sanctions, frozen assets, and regional influence. The families of the 5 killed pilots are grieving privately, their losses acknowledged in official statements but not widely publicized. The Pentagon prefers to minimize media coverage of casualties, avoiding the kind of sustained public attention that erodes support for military operations. But the information cannot be suppressed entirely. News outlets have reported the losses. Analysis pieces are questioning the strategy. Members of Congress are asking whether the operation is achieving its objectives or simply expending lives without corresponding gains. Historically, the United States has maintained air superiority in every conflict since Vietnam. The assumption has been that American pilots flying superior aircraft with advanced sensors and weapons can dominate any airspace they choose to contest. That assumption held true in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. In those conflicts, enemy air defenses were degraded quickly, allowing U.S. aircraft to operate with relative freedom. The loss rates were minimal. The risk was calculated and accepted. Iran is different. The air defense network is more sophisticated, more redundant, and more carefully designed to exploit the weaknesses of U.S. tactics. The operators are well-trained and disciplined. The systems are protected by geography, concealed in mountainous terrain that complicates targeting. And crucially, the network is layered in a way that creates overlapping engagement zones where aircraft cannot maneuver freely without exposing themselves to fire from multiple directions. The no-fly directive acknowledges this reality. It is not framed as a defeat, but as a tactical adjustment. Official statements emphasize that the directive allows for continued pressure on Iranian targets through alternative means, but within the military community, the interpretation is clear. For the first time in decades, there is an adversary that has successfully denied the United States access to its airspace. The psychological impact of that shift is profound. Pilots who spent their careers training to penetrate enemy defenses, confident in their ability to strike any target anywhere, are now being told that certain airspace is off-limits. The missions they trained for cannot be flown. The targets they could reach are now beyond engagement range. The confidence that comes from air superiority has been replaced by caution and constraint. Drone operators are being asked to take on more of the burden, but they are facing the same air defenses with platforms that are slower, less maneuverable, and more vulnerable. The loss rate for drones is even higher than for manned aircraft, though each loss generates less public attention because no pilot is killed or captured. But the financial cost accumulates, and the operational limitations remain. The strategic question facing Pentagon planners is whether this situation is sustainable. If Iranian airspace cannot be contested without prohibitive losses, can the larger objectives of the campaign be achieved? Sanctions and diplomatic pressure continue, but they operate on different timelines and with different mechanisms. Military operations were supposed to complement those efforts by demonstrating capability and resolve. Instead, the military component has stalled, constrained by an adversary that has successfully imposed costs the United States is unwilling to bear. There are no easy solutions. Developing new tactics to defeat integrated air defenses takes time. Acquiring new systems designed specifically to counter the Iranian network requires funding, production, and deployment timelines measured in years. In the near term, the directive stands. American pilots will not cross the border. Missions will be conducted from standoff range. And Iranian airspace, for now, belongs to Iran. 4 weeks, 8 aircraft, 5 dead, 3 captured, and a directive that marks the end of an era where American air power could operate anywhere without constraint. The no-fly zone is real. But this time, it protects the adversary, not the